Well, hello everyone. My name is Matthew Taylor, and welcome to our winter bush broadcast, where we're going to be exploring the magical region between the Fitzgerald River and the Stirling Ranges National Park in the southwestern corner of Western Australia. I'm joining you today from Sydney. That's Sydney you can see behind me. I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I'd like to pay respect to their elders, past, present, and in the future, and extend that respect to any other Indigenous Australians online with us today. I certainly recognise, as we always do, that the remarkable Australian environment that we look to conserve is on land that has never been ceded, and its future is a responsibility of all of us Australians working together. Now, I'm very excited about this special session because we're going to be talking about an exciting new acquisition for bush heritage in southwest WA. It's a property we're currently fundraising for, and it's part of our 2030 strategy of deepening and doubling our impact. And of course, that includes working in strong partnership with traditional custodians. If you joined our webinars before, you may see a few differences, and that accounts for me not starting quite on time. Apologies. We're using the Teams platform today, so we may have a couple of technical glitches. Please bear with us. Hopefully, it will make life easier for us as we do more of these. You'll see a couple of extra icons on the screen. The React icon, where you can click on a little emoji, and if you love social media, you can click on those and you can send happy birds flying across the screen and silly things like that. And please use the chat function, as we normally do, to say good day, let us know what country you're calling from. And the chat function is where we'd ask you to post any questions that may come up during the webinar. So ignore the Q&A, just use the chat function, and we'll get to your questions in the Q&A section. Now, whilst I'm in Sydney suffering our coldest night this winter, my colleagues are coming to you live from our Red Moort Reserve in WA. So please welcome Alex Hams, our Healthy Landscape Manager, and Chantal Fowler, who's head of our West region, which covers that huge expanse of WA and South Australia. Hi, guys.
Hi, Matthew.
Looks like you've got some nice weather and a bit of sun over there.
Yeah, we do actually. It's quite beautiful here today, this morning, and we've had a little bit of a cold snap over here as well. But the sun's out at the moment. We're very much enjoying it on our backs.
Yes, absolutely.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, listen, I'm going to ask you first, Alex, if I may. You've lived and worked in the region for at least 4 years, haven't you? So can you sort of introduce us and tell us what's so amazing about your particular part of the world?
Well, we're joining you all here today from Koreng Noongar Country at the Michael Tichbond Field Station at Red Moort Reserve. This is a really special part of the world for a lot of people. It's one of 36 international biodiversity hotspots. So that represents areas that have very, very high biodiversity, particularly in plant species that exist here. But they're also under threat of habitat destruction from a range of different activities, but primarily from agricultural clearing for agricultural land back in the day. We have a very special part of the world here working on a connectivity program, connecting up, particularly in this space, the Fitzgerald, between the Stirling and the Fitzgerald River National Parks. This area, particularly here, is which we call the Fitzgerald, is known as a priority hotspot as a part of the Threatened Species Action Plan. It's one of 20 priority places that the government's designated as important for protection of biodiversity values, particularly around threatened species. And it's really exciting to be working here in this space and trying to protect that conservation values across the region.
Fantastic. And Chantal, we know that Fitzgerald is, I mean, look at those flowers, aren't they spectacular? I know the region is spectacular, not just for its flowers, but I'd love to hear what it is about our conservation strategy that means this acquisition, if we can get it, is going to contribute to those 2030 goals.
Thanks, Matthew. Yeah, look, it's a really as Alex outlined, a really important part of Australia from a conservation perspective and a cultural perspective. And while this acquisition may not be at the scale of Evelyn Downs that we recently acquired in South Australia, it's really important as part of our deepening strategy to 2030, as well as doubling. So it does expand our footprint in the region, but it's also it strengthens what we're doing in this landscape. It's restoring the smaller properties that have high conservation value, which is absolutely critical to what we're doing, and reconnecting across the broader landscape, and expands our existing reserve footprint and really allows us to deepen our impact across the broader ecosystems.
Fantastic. Now, Alex, I know we're under a bit of the time pressure at the moment, aren't we, with this acquisition? If all goes well, in 11 days, you're going to have a new reserve to manage, aren't you?
We sure are.
Apart from its slightly dodgy name, tell us why this particular reserve is so special.
It's a great, exciting time for us down here, and obviously, as I mentioned before, that connectivity piece between the Stirlings and the Fitzgerald River National Parks is really important part of the focus for our program down here. Dodgey Downs creates an opportunity for us to connect back up the Monjebup and the Redmore reserves, but also strengthen that corridor along the Monjebup reserve. So where Monjebup and Monjebup North sit together, going up to Cracker Nature Reserves, it bolsters that corridor significantly. So it's very exciting for us to see that. We've obviously got some remnant bushland that sits on that property, so we'll be looking at doing some protection of those areas, but then gradually doing that restoration piece on Dodgey Downs moving forward, which is very exciting for us to see, particularly for some of the plant species that we see there and the vegetation communities that exist in the area.
Yes, fantastic. You that one of those pictures that were just thrown up shows the name of the place, doesn't it? Dodgey Downs. Do we have any insight why the owners called it that in the first place?
Oh, I think it was just a bit of a dodgy piece of land to be put into farming, to be honest. I think that's probably it. But look, there's definitely nothing dodgy about this prospect for us. You know, this is a great opportunity for us to put this bit of land back into natural bushland, create those corridors that the wildlife needs to move between those bushland areas, and it's definitely an exciting prospect for us, and we're really looking forward to having this as our newest reserve within the Fitzsterling.
Fantastic. So tell me what the initial work is that's going to be undertaken at Dodgey Downs, and what in particular you're excited about.
Oh, look, I think, firstly, that just the reconnection is really exciting. It's actually was a property that was subdivided from the Monjebup Reserve, and so just reuniting those two properties is really special, and creating that stronger wildlife corridor, and particularly that connection with Redmore Reserve, where we're here today, and also Monjebup as well. It's also really important initially for us to understand a bit more about the reserve once we're able to gain access. So undertaking flora and fauna surveys, whale monitoring, and establishing that baseline data set of what we have on the reserve to be able to measure and monitor our work over the coming years. And also really important to working with the Koreng Noongar community and facilitating return to country to conduct cultural surveys. So that's a really important part of understanding the landscapes that we're a part of managing, and working out where those priorities need to go. So working alongside the Noongar community will be also a really important priority.
That's fantastic. And Alex, in some of those that little video of the drone footage flying over, it was a fairly stark contrast between the well-vegetated sort of native and remnant veg and those wheat paddocks, aren't they, that have been ploughed. So there's as I understand it, there is a small amount of vegetation on Dodgey Downs, and it's a bit unusual for us, isn't it, to buy a property that had so much. Is it about 600 hectares? that need re-vegging. That's a huge
Yeah.
amount, but it's a great opportunity, isn't it? How do you tackle that?
Yeah, look, the property's 762 hectares, and just over 600 hectares of that is cleared for agriculture. And as you can see on the footage, there is a very, very stark sort of contrast between the two different areas. We have to tackle this in small mouthfuls. We're proposing a program where we do about 200 hectares of restoration each year. So Dodgey Downs will actually continue to be farmed through a lease arrangement with one of the local farmers until we start doing the restoration, and then we'll gradually just reduce the area that's farmed on that property as we restore it. So about 200 hectares per year, which won't commence straight away because we're actually halfway through our Eddie Garrett restoration program, which is, again, a very similar program, about 600 hectares of high biodiverse restoration that we're doing on that property. That's actually being undertaken as we speak. We've got Noongar rangers out there planting seedlings, and the direct seeding's just been completed. But that sets, I guess, the blueprint for what we're going to be proposing for Dodgey Downs. And we certainly know from previous revegetation efforts, including just over 400 hectares that we delivered on Monjebup Reserve, just right next door to Dodgey Downs, that we can do that, and we can do it really successfully. We've got some great, outcomes that have been observed, new animals coming into that space, and particularly some of our threatened species, including Carnaby, black cockatoo, and the Malleefowl, coming in and foraging, feeding, and actively breeding on site. And so Dodgey Downs, while it sounds like a really big bit of work, is actually something that we know that we can do, and we can do really well. And we're really excited about the prospect of being able to get stuck into it.
That's fantastic. And one of the things that surprised me when I visited last year was the unbelievable capacity for those ploughed wheat paddocks to turn into some really good-looking bush in really quite a short time. It's not something that on the East Coast you'd expect that to be overrun with weeds and out of control. But you've got a magic formula there that seems to work that can be really quite transformative, can't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of work that goes in before we even put a seed in the ground, Matthew, and good weed control to begin with. Obviously, having crops put in there and the weeds being regularly sprayed out prior to our restoration effort sort of does help a little bit. But definitely the good preparation and making sure that when we do the restoration, the revegetation effort, we go really hard to begin with to make sure that we get a really good germination success rate. And then obviously the growth of those seedlings over time helps shade out a lot of the weeds that do present in the first year or two as well.
Well, I've seen how good it can get. So tell me a little bit more about how you create the biodiversity there through the selection of what sort of grasses, what shrubs, what trees you put in. How's that species mix determined?
Well, we often will look at the remnant bushland. So we often do vegetation surveys initially on our reserves before we even think about doing restorations. We understand what species exist, what vegetation communities, and then we can map out the species list that are going to suit those. We have Mallee Heath as the majority kind of vegetation unit that exists across this landscape, but we also do have mallet and moor woodlands and some other vegetation communities, including granite based vegetation communities. Within those, we then map out the soils, and Chantal spoke a little bit about that. That's one of the first things we'll be doing is mapping out the soils in fairly high resolution. The soils change pretty quickly in across this landscape, which is one of the reasons why the vegetation is so diverse. So we map those out and align them to the species composition that would exist on those soils, and then we plan and develop up a program, making sure that we've got enough native seed from the local area to be able to put back into the revegetation mix, but making sure that we're planting the right things in the right area to get the best success as well. We're pretty lucky in this area. We've got a special vegetation community called Kwongan Heath, which is very much proteaceous rich vegetation community dominated by Banksias, Hakeas, Isopogans and the like. They're very important for species such as the Carnaby black cockatoo, which is a threatened species nationally, and particularly for their foraging habitat. So they come in and feed on these vegetation communities on their way out to their breeding habitats. And then also really important for things like the honey possum, which requires nectar all year round to support their development and growth. So those really high nectivorous sort of species of flowering plants are really important. And so if we can create some of those little niches, those little hotspots for those species to enjoy and thrive on, it gives them the best chance to survive in future.
That's fantastic, because you've also got some incredibly high rates of endemism, don't you? When you told me some of the ranges of some of the plant species there, they're incredibly tiny, aren't they?
Yeah, we do. And some of them are really hard to grow, I've got to say, Matthew. Others we know we can grow well. So, we're looking at planting about 150 species or close as we can to that in our restoration effort. We know we've got over 1,000 species sitting across our reserve network here in the Fitzsterling. So it's a pretty small proportion of that, but I think overall it's quite high in terms of regeneration effort. But yes, certainly some of the species that we see here, we see nowhere else in the world, which is one of the reasons why it's an international biodiversity hotspot and a place where it's really important for us to protect, enhance, and where we can sort of develop up these little connections to make sure that the diversity of the genetics of those plants and animals has a chance to spread as well.
Yes, that's fantastic. And one of the questions that's come through already, Chantal, perhaps you could respond to this one, is does the reserve actually abut existing bush heritage reserves, which speaks directly to the connectivity, doesn't it? Can you explain for us how we chose this particular opportunity?
Yeah, so it does connect up with our Monjebup reserves and the Red Moort Reserve where we're here today. So it's a really important piece of the puzzle across the broader landscape. We do put in a lot of effort to look across the broad landscape between the Fitzsterling or the Fitzgerald River National Park and the Stirling Ranges National Park, and work out what those strategic connecting pieces are, and also working with a lot of the landholders in the area to do that broader conservation work. So Dodgey Downs is a really important piece of that broader landscape, and we're really thrilled to be able to bring it into that section there. You can see on the map, just at the south of Monjebup and then to the west of Red Moort.
Yes, but those of you who've got a magnifying glass, Megan, our wonderful producer, has put up the map, and there is a small red dot that shows just how it connects up. So the test for you, Chantal, can you point in which direction Dodgey Downs is from where you're sitting?
Great question.
Sure Alex
I'm going to get Alex.
That way,
right
fantastic.
Over there. It's only a couple of kilometres from where we're sitting right now, Matthew. It actually connects up to the northwest corner of Red Moort Reserve, just over our right shoulders. And
fantastic.
There's a 200-metre shared boundary, and we'll obviously be working alongside our neighbours to see if we can organise to thresh that connectivity slightly up by seeing if they can revegetate one of the corners of their properties. But if not, we know that little bit of connectivity is going to be really valuable for animals moving across. So that corridor aspect is definitely a great outcome for us on the back of this acquisition.
Like if I was imagining myself being a small marsupial faced with those massive wheat fields. It's not an easy barrier to cross, is it? follow your nose for the smell of something beautiful. So tell us a bit more, Alex, about these threatened species that will benefit from the work that you've got planned out for the next few years. You've already mentioned Carnabys and the wonderful honey possums, but there's a whole lot more, aren't there?
Yeah, there absolutely is, Matthew. The Malleefowl is obviously one of those threatened species that that exists across most of southern Australia, actually. And we know that there's a really good remnant population here within some of our reserves, but also some of the neighbouring nature reserves that exist. They don't thrive on cleared landscapes. They actually need to have that bushland and good quality bushland in place. We've seen some really great outcomes from the restoration effort and Malleefowl actively breeding in our restoration sites on Monjebup Reserve, which is fantastic. It means that we've got the mix right. We've got the resources that they need, both food wise, but also enough organic material to establish their nesting mounds. And we've seen some really successful breeding happen, at least on a couple of sites within that revegetation effort. So that's one of the species that we're looking to try and recruit back into the restoration sites that we've got there. The black glove wallaby again, and the Tamar wallaby are two of our kind of keynote species that exist across the Stirling region. Really important for biodiversity to maintain those two species. They're very vulnerable to that issue of fragmentation and small habitats that they can exist in. So providing a connectivity for those two species is absolutely pivotal for their survival and ongoing success. The pygmy possums are one of the cutest little creatures that you could ever imagine. They actually really love the restoration sites that we've developed over here, and we know through monitoring of our nest boxes that we install to provide some habitat for them, that they actively recruit into these revegetation areas from surrounding bushlands. And certainly the small little creatures like this are very much benefiting from the biodiverse revegetation that we're doing, and particularly putting in that ground layer revegetation effort so that they can creep along the ground to the trees where they live. And then, of course, the Carnaby black cockatoo, which is a very important species. It's listed as a threatened species nationally. It's under a lot of threat through clearing and fragmentation of their habitat, particularly their breeding and foraging habitats, and certainly the revegetation effort that we can apply in Dodgey Downs and other areas is going to benefit them significantly. The Chudich, these guys are actually not that common in our area. We know that they exist in the Fitzgerald River National Park, and with that connectivity across the landscape, we're likely to start seeing them recruit back into this landscape, and certainly on the back of some of the efforts in controlling some of our invasive predators like cats and fox. That's really highly likely. And then there's a few other species, including the western whitbird and some of our amphibians and reptiles that we see across this space that are going to only benefit from this restoration and the acquisition of new reserves as a part of our conservation effort here in the Fitzsterling.
Fantastic. And I'd love to know how you got a picture of a western whitbird up on a twig like that. I spent several days looking for western whitbirds and they never showed themselves, even though they were in 50-centimetre heath. They never showed. They're great skulkers, aren't they?
They certainly are, and we hear them all the time, actually, but I've actually personally never seen one with my own bare eyes. Go. So there you go.
You and me too.
So who took that photo? Graham Chapman. Well done, Graham.
Yes. Well, Graham's a well-known photographer of birds, so he must have some skills we don't, Alex.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, that's a lovely insight into the critters that are going to benefit from this. But of course, part of our challenge is always managing those threats. And you mentioned cats and foxes. Chantal, perhaps I could ask you, apart from the obvious challenges of the land degradation that's happened and clearing and the sort of the wheat paddocks, what ongoing threats are you expecting to find at Dodgey Downs, and how do you anticipate we'll tackle them?
Yeah, thank you, Matthew. Look, we're doing a lot in terms of management of threats across the broader landscape. So it's really about extending some of that work now across Dodgey Downs as well. The region, like a lot of parts of Australia, is not immune to the impacts from climate change. And so it is really important to be able to focus on the threat management and to be able to give these species that Alex has outlined, the best chance for survival. Feral cat fox rabbit control is a really key priority for us. We've got an integrated pest management program across the broader WA and SA region across the areas that we work in. And here we're working across 50,000 hectares and supporting a lot of our neighbours as well with management of these invasive species. So not just focused on our reserves, but also managing some of those issues across the broader landscape. Weed control is another important one. We've got African lovegrass, bridal creeper, Scotch thistle are some of the key weeds that we want to get it under control when we acquire the property. So spraying those. Burning work as well. So burning for biodiversity, and also again working with Noongar to undertake cultural burning and bushfire preparedness as well, putting in fire breaks. We've recently been building our capacity in the region to undertake burning work. So you can see pictured here the Noongar fire crew training. We've done training for our staff down here in the southwest with Noongar recently to do some fire crew training. So really sort of building capacity across that broader region to undertake relevant burning activities. Last one's dieback management is another issue in the area. So Phytophthora is a real threat to some of those really important plant species that we've talked about earlier. And so making sure that we're setting up and having sort of public awareness around the spread of Phytophthora in the region, having washdown facilities set up so that we are managing spread and potential infestations across that area to protect the vulnerable vegetation communities.
That's a fungal pathogen, isn't it, that causes the plant to sicken and eventually die off, and it's transmissible, isn't it, in soil? So you've got to be really careful about moving it around, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's a soil-borne mold, and it's moved by particularly people. I mean, it does move naturally, but people exacerbate that movement. So it's really important that we sort of protect those areas through exclusion in some cases, but also just making sure that people come in to these properties clean. So our biosecurity measures are pretty strict for that very reason.
Fantastic. Well, Chantal, you mentioned there that the Noongar and how we're partnering with them on fire control. Perhaps, Alex, is there anything else, or either of you, anything else you can tell us about how we're going to develop that relationship? Because that's a cornerstone of the bush heritage approach to land management and conservation, isn't it? Is to work with the traditional custodians.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. It's fundamental to the way that we operate. We've been working pretty closely with the Noongar community down here since we've started our operations over 20 years ago, and more recently there's been a native title settlement for the Noongar Nation. So as a part of that settlement agreement, there will be over 300,000 hectares of land being handed back to the Noongar community, a significant portion of which will actually be present in the local area down here. So a part of our sort of way that we can try and assist and support that ongoing management is to work with Waggle Kep, which is the Regional Aboriginal Corporation, and some of the local Aboriginal communities to do adequate planning and preparation for that ongoing management, but also working with the community to find out what are the key desires for Noongar people to manage country, make sure that there's really good access back onto country to do cultural practices as well as healing of country, and make sure that some of those heritage sites are protected ongoing. We also work really closely with our Noongar Ranger partners in doing some of our monitoring, but also doing some of our restoration efforts. So working with the rangers to put out, say, remote sensing cameras, working with the rangers on being able to provide some capabilities around the feral animal control work, but also, really getting into seed collection and restoration, so planting of seedlings and part of the work that we've been initiating out of Eddie Garrup is actually the development of some little nodes with some bush tucker foods. So we're planting little areas which have little native potatoes, the yolk, which is really exciting for some of the Aboriginal elders who have grown up eating this food for generations, and being able to then have areas that they can then show their young people coming through what to collect and how to go about that. It's a great little inclusion in the revegetation program.
That's fantastic. Well, it sounds like it's very much a co-development of plans to how to heal country, and you're basically combining traditional knowledge there with modern science and technology, aren't you? To walk forwards together.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's fantastic. Well, you've given us a really good feel for what this property's like and how it contributes to the sort of bigger scheme. So this is the point where I'm going to let everyone know who's on the webinar that we're in the middle of a very short settlement, aren't we? We've got until June 30th because we settle the next day, which means our fundraising for this property is probably the speediest we've ever had to do. So we've got a target of 5 million to raise to buy this property. And we've managed to get to just over 2 million so far, which is a fantastic response. And I know that I've seen that some of the supporters on the chat today have already contributed to helping us acquire this. So thank you for that. The challenge now is to get to 5 million in the next 11 days so that Alex and Chantal can enjoy the property they've spent so much and invested in so far. So we're on the final push. If anybody today has seen the value of this and would love to contribute, then please do so. It would make a big difference, not least to Alex and Chantal. And because it's a bit of a stretch, we've had an incredibly generous offer from a couple of our supporters that they are willing to match donations made in the next sort of 48, 72 hours by Sunday. Any donations of 5,000 or more, they're willing to match because they recognise that will then double the impact of the gift and hopefully give us that stretch to reach the 5 million. So if you are able to make a donation or contribute in any way, please do hop on the website and make a donation. Or if you'd rather talk to us a little bit further to understand a bit more what's involved, then feel free to contact our wonderful customer team, their customer care team. They're coming up there in the chat, and we'd love to talk to you further. But while you're pondering that, there are a few questions that have come in that might help make this decision. So let me turn to some of those questions now. They're filling in some of the gaps of the story we've told so far. One of the first questions we had in was, what's it looking like after the long, hot summer? I can see behind you some wonderful green bushes and some fairly dry brown land. And a linked question was, could you give us a sense of the rainfall distribution for the region over the year to help understand, the dynamics of what's at play there?
Yeah, sure. Yes, definitely. We've had a pretty long, dry summer over this last sort of 6 to 8 months. Haven't had a great deal of rainfall at all during that period, and definitely we've seen some stress appearing in some of our vegetation communities. Certainly, the revegetation effort has hung in as well as we could have expected. In fact, it's probably a little bit better than we potentially expected, given the low amount of rainfall over that period. but definitely we're looking forward to having some rain over the next couple of months, and most of our rainfall does fall in winter, so between May and say October. This region's a funny one. We actually sit in a rain shadow of the Stirling Range, so we sometimes miss some of the rainfall that falls closer towards the coast. Generally, we fit between the 300 and the 600 mil per year average, mil per year range, averaging about 450 to 500 mils per year. So there's enough rain in there to provide the vegetation with enough juice to survive. But I guess we do have some periods of drought where we get closer to that 300 mils per year. Last year we had about 450, so we're sitting on a roundabout average. It's maybe slightly under, but it was okay. And we're hoping for an average or above average year this year, so that all the plants that we're putting in the ground at the moment can grow and thrive and survive.
Fantastic. Well, another question relating to the condition for regrowth was a question about how the past cropping regime and the fertilizer treatments and weed control, the sort of chemical inputs, does that have an adverse impact on soil biodiversity, and how does that affect your restoration work? Is there ways you need to compensate for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yes, a lot of our native vegetation doesn't like to have too many nutrients in the soil, though, particularly the proteaceous rich species. We tend to remove any agriculture for the 6 to 8 months prior to us revegetating, so that there's no inputs just immediately prior to our revegetation. We've actually had a PhD researching a researcher researching soil microbiology within our soil profiles and looking at areas that are cropped or cleared, and then areas that are revegetated, and comparing those to the remnant bushland. Funnily enough, the revegetation or the revegetated sites and the farmland sites are not too dissimilar in terms of their soil microbiology. So I think that's a pretty good indication that the microbiology does decline significantly once it's cleared of its native vegetation and cropped or farmed for some time. And certainly something that we're looking into is the ability for us to try and inoculate those soils with mycorrhizal fungi and other things to be able to sort of provide that sort of boost to the soil to provide the best outcome for the revegetation community that we put back in.
Fantastic. And a similar question was, do you have salinity problems with soils in your part of the world? Is that a challenge, getting salinity affecting the ability for the vegetation to come back?
Only really in the valleys. So some of the more incised, sort of deeper valleys and creek lines, we do have some salinity. Luckily enough, a lot of those areas were left vegetated when the clearing occurred. I think a lot of the clearing in our patch has sort of happened after the 50s, where salinity started to emerge as a bit of an issue. And in fact, a lot of the clearing was done only 50 years ago. So where that knowledge was kind of already existing, and they kept a nice buffer of vegetation around those creek lines. Definitely there's some stresses from salinity in some of those deeper creek lines, but nothing that will impact our restoration efforts on Dodgey Downs, thankfully. And so that's one less issue that we have to confront when we do this long hard slog of restoring that bit of country.
Yes, indeed. Are there specific things that you can do to combat salinity, Alex, or is it a case of letting the natural veg work its magic over time?
No, I think revegetating the catchments, reducing the recharge of those groundwater aquifers is really important. We know from other work that's happened elsewhere that if you do restore or revegetate catchments on a large scale, which we're attempting to do, you can actually have a significant impact on the impacts of salinity, and particularly in those sort of lower parts of the landscape. And definitely the 600 hectares that we're revegetating at Eddie Garrup, the 600 hectares that we'll be doing at Dodgey Downs, and the 400 plus hectares at Monjebup Reserve that all sit in that same catchment will definitely have a big impact on, I guess, the impacts for salinity in the area in general.
Fantastic, fantastic. And back to the predator control that you both talked about. Are there any specific measures? I mean, you talked about generally controlling them. Are there any specific techniques or measures that you've learned in the West? Because I know, for instance, that cats seem to behave differently, whichever part of Australia you're in, and that every reserve manager has their own approach. So any insights you can share with our listeners today about feral control?
I mean, that one system we are testing a lot around the broader region is the use of the Felixer cat control system. So that allows us to can use new technologies and test its effectiveness. Cats are extremely difficult to manage and very, very tricky to find good strategies to manage feral cat numbers, and obviously have devastating impacts on the wildlife. So having new technologies and being able to sort of see how that impacts on numbers more broadly is a really good way. And yeah, we're doing that across the Midwest and also our Midwest reserves. We've been testing that system as well.
There's also a new technology that we're actually just employing at the moment on the back of receiving a grant from the WA Feral Cat Strategy, is a trap alert system. So we're actively employing a bunch of different measures, as Chantal mentioned, to control cats and foxes. But one of those is to use traps. And for us, that's very labour intensive. So we can only put out so many traps, and so then you only get so much success with them. With this trap alert technology that we're trialling, we hopefully, if it's successful, we can set a lot more traps across a much larger area and have less people actually having to need to check them on a daily basis. So use of that technology obviously is critical to improving the outcomes for the environment, but also, better use of our resources and the funding that we receive from our generous supporters.
Indeed. And turning now to those lovely Carnabys that you talked about, and we had some pictures of, they need nesting hollows, don't they? And are they like other big cockatoos? They need spouts in some of the bigger eucalypts. The question was, have we got any plan for facilitating them by working either with neighbours or on our properties to provide, more nesting hollows?
Yep. We actually do have a couple of artificial nesting hollows that we've put up into some of the vegetation on some of our reserves. That they're not currently being used by the Carnabys, but we do know that there are some very nearby nesting sites, natural nesting sites, that are currently being used. And because of that, we're focusing a lot of our effort onto establishing foraging habitats, so that the Banksias, the Hakeas, these plants, the Grevilleas, the plants that the Carnaby's black cockatoo love to feed on, to provide them plenty of food for when they are here breeding, but also when they're on their migration towards some of their breeding habitats further to the north and the east of here as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So we're getting ready. We put out the welcome mat.
Exactly.
To come. Yeah, fantastic. There's another question coming about the Chuditch, and is there a risk of trapping the Chuditch instead of cats? And would that matter? And I think that's a really important question. I know a little bit about how the Felixer is so smart, it knows what it's targeting. But Chantal, did you want to talk to that one?
Let Alex talk about this one.
Yeah, look, it definitely is a risk. And some of the trapping particularly, yes, you can trap non-target species, and Chuditch would be one of those for sure. That's one of the reasons why we have to go out and check our traps within the first 3 hours after sunlight, to make sure that if there are animals trapped, one, that they're treated humanely, and if there are native animals, that we can release them safely, so that they don't have any ongoing issues. Certainly with the Felix grooming traps, so the ones that spray a 1080 gel onto those animals, a lot of our native species have a very high tolerance to 1080 in this area, so that they're almost certainly not going to be impacted by that, whereas the cats and the foxes are very highly susceptible to it, and so they'll succumb to that through that natural process. But certainly, yeah, the chuditch are one that we do, where we do see them, we do tend to trap them slightly higher numbers than some other species, but we're very cautious of that, and we're very aware when they are around that we need to be aware of that and check those very regularly.
They do get a feed, don't they? If they're trapped, they do at least get a feed for their overnight accommodation.
They do indeed.
There was a question has come through about whether wombats are found in the area, and I realised I didn't know the answer. I know the southern hairy nose is at least found in South Australia, but I don't believe wombats are found in WA. Is that right?
No, I don't believe that they've managed to get across the Nullarbor. They may have here at some point in the distant past, but certainly we don't see them here. I actually drove across the Nullarbor earlier this year, and I saw plenty of wombat burrows, but haven't seen any past the Nullarbor. So no, not something that we see regularly here. But it'd be great to see some digging animals starting to re-emerge into this landscape, and certainly things like the bandicoots and things like that would be one of the first species that we'd like to sort of see coming back in and providing that engineering sort of habitat values that we see from burrowing animals, and making sure that there's seeds and other things starting to go back into the soils and help to drive that ecosystem restoration.
Fantastic. Well, one of our listeners has asked the question that I think everybody's probably considering, whether is Dodgey Downs a name that we want to carry forward, and what are our plans, and how are we going to rename it if we are? Chantal, maybe you can help us with our approach to that.
It's a good question. Put it out to our supporters. Look, I think we'll probably have a bit of a reflection on whether we sort of amalgamate some of our names, and obviously also perhaps talking with the Noongar community as well, whether there's an appropriate name for this piece of the landscape. So yeah, probably yet to be determined, but for now at least it's a bit quirky and memorable.
Yes, I think it might actually help our fundraising that we're asking people to help us turn Dodgey Downs into something a whole lot better in the future. Yeah. So
I think probably I get asked that question a lot, Matthew, and a lot of people have said, I think you should keep the name. I think you should keep it. Like, okay. Well, we've got a few people to ask before we make any decisions about that. But yeah, it's a fun name we've certainly had a bit of fun playing around with it over the last couple of months.
Wonderful. Well, I think the last question I've got that I've come up is a question that I'm sure will be dear to both your hearts, which is, have you got your eyes on any other properties? Now, we haven't got this one yet, but what a lovely question to be asked, isn't it?
Fabulous question. If you ask me, I'd say yes, we've got plenty of properties on our radar. Look, the whole opportunity to reconnect some of these reserves and across this landscape, some of the bushland areas that are fragmented is enormous. It provides such a great benefit to the wildlife and to the plants that exist here, and so we'd be negligent if we weren't actively looking for new opportunities. But of course, the cost of these reserves is not to be sneezed at, and so we're making sure that we're doing the best effort we can to get the best out of those areas and really make sure that we're bedding down the investment that our generous supporters provide to us to caretake these spaces. And yeah, I think if you asked our finance team, they'd probably have a different answer to what I did. But yeah, we're definitely looking at new opportunities right across the country, in fact, to deepen and double our impact.
Yeah, it's an ongoing process, isn't it? In every region, there are people who are constantly on the lookout for the right properties that fit our criteria. They're in our priority landscapes, and so we've got, if you like, a pipeline of opportunities. Because the challenge is, isn't it, that these things turn over quite rarely. So you might have your eyes on a patch that isn't going to be sold for a generation, but if we've done the work in advance and we know we want it, then we're ready when the time comes, which is what usually happens. So, well, listen, I think we've come to the end of the questions. So I think we'll wrap this up now and just flag that if you like what you've heard and would like to help these wonderful people talking to us from WA to acquire our next reserve, please do consider making a donation using the links we've provided. The match giving, there's an answer that's come in the chat. Our wonderful supporters are willing to match donations up to 50,000 and double that. So that's the extent of possibility that we can have through that for doubling the impact. And please take our heartfelt thanks for contributing to bush heritage in whichever way you do, whether it's through your time as a volunteer, through supporting us with your regular donations, or through contributing to special case funding like this for these wonderful acquisitions. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Chantal and Alex, for sharing your lovely bit of landscape. I look forward to seeing you later in the year. My little treat to come and see you out there. And please stay tuned for our closing slideshow, which is going to feature some more of those wonderful plants, proteaceous plants that you get in your part of the world. And I look forward to seeing you for the next webinar. Thanks all, folks. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.